Hello, friends, and welcome back. It's that time once again. Concert Conversations. We're grateful to Chris Connolly and Wells Fargo Advisors for the support, but it's a wonderful opportunity to get an inside look at the music with our very own Quad City Symphony Orchestra music director and conductor, Mark Russell Smith. Maestro, it's wonderful to see you.
Thank you. Great to be back.
And what a season! Oh my
It's it's
goodness.
it's exciting. There are many things happening, and it's exciting to get started. It really is.
Well, tonight we're just talking about the upcoming October concert, which will kick off the Masterworks season. Now I think about 110, 111 or somewhere in there. I'm not even sure anymore. But we'll wait, maybe it's 109. I should check that. I'll make sure we check that out sooner or later.
Okay.
But Masterworks #1 is a wonderful celebration of another bit of historical milestone, the 200th birthday of Anton Bruckner. We'll get to that in just a moment, but I always love the thought that goes into the way you start concerts, and I extrapolate that thinking goes into starting a season. And to start this season, a wonderful piece of music by Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, the overture to Die Zauberflöte. Tell us a little bit about that pick.
Well, what goes well with Bruckner. I mean, this concert is all about Bruckner and Bruckner's 200th birthday, which most people, well, people care less about than I do, for sure. I mean, I love Bruckner and I love his music, and I've conducted here a number of times, and so our audience, I think, enjoys it, and certainly the orchestra plays it really well. And so to really Mozart Bruckner pairing is something I do often because they're both Austrians, because Bruckner is deep romantic, heavy fare, and Mozart is lighter, and of course this theatrical Mozart is very light. And so the Gipps concerto is a whole separate thing, and so to kind of pair with the Bruckner, I think Mozart is kind of a perfect starter, time-wise and aesthetically, and yeah, just kind of stylistically in contrast to the other two pieces.
And for those who are not familiar, this overture comes from the wonderful opera, The Magic Flute, which has some incredible melodies and wonderful bits that even people who don't know they like opera yet are familiar with. What are some of your attractors as far as the Magic Flute is concerned?
Well, just so I mean, the whole thing about Mozart is that as opposed to being an innovator like Beethoven or Stravinsky or Debussy, someone who changed the world, what Mozart did was he was a perfecter. And so he took the extant forms, he took the for lack of a better word, the cliches of music of his time, all the rules. I mean, he followed all the rules, but what he did was expand things and add depth and add, just, fantastic creativity and just deepened things and created new things out of these old forms. And so the Singspiel, which is basically like a musical comedy nowadays, like a Broadway show, basically was what the Magic Flute started out as. But what Mozart does with it is add depth and add characterization, and through the music and through the structures of the piece, I mean, there's lots of dialogue in between, so it does adhere to the kind of form of the Singspiel or the Broadway play or whatever. But the depth of the music and the creativity there and the melodies that he creates, and therefore the depth of characterization that he's able to produce. And that's what's fantastic about it. And so, there are all sorts of interesting conflicts with a seemingly, good bunch of guys maybe have their prejudices, and maybe it's not so great as and the anti-hero maybe isn't such the anti-hero, and there's misunderstandings, and there's a little misogyny. I mean, there are all sorts of things that were kind of typical of that era, that Mozart highlights and kind of sometimes clarifies, but other times leaves things kind of vague. So anyway,
Well,
it's a great show, really one of my favorites.
before we get into Ruth Gipps, because I want to talk about her concerto for oboe and orchestra, is it in your book? Do you think it's an accurate depiction that we have from the film Amadeus that when Mozart did these, I mean, you would hear these tunes whistled and hummed and sung in the streets of Vienna in a time well before radio and the popular thing, because he would put these shows on where people could see them. Is that an exaggeration that the Viennese folks really took to these melodies?
No, well, I mean, that's not an exaggeration. I mean, frankly, the Viennese were the least welcoming of Mozart. I mean, the people of Prague, they were whistling the tunes of Don Giovanni, and the Viennese were a little less welcoming. I mean, certainly that he had his fans, and certainly his music was popular. I mean, frankly, well, just a few years later, Rossini's tunes were being whistled, and Beethoven, made Beethoven extremely jealous, and so, I mean, the musical theater of the day, these operas were what people were whistling and what they were listening to, and so, absolutely, to an extent, Mozart's music was
Sure.
very, very popular. Again, the Viennese less so than other cities, actually.
Yeah, yeah, but
They don't appreciate, the profit in your own town, as they say.
yeah,
The profit from your own homeland. You don't appreciate quite as much, maybe.
exactly, exactly. Well, this leads us to some work with which I'm not at all familiar, but please help us to set the table for Ruth Gipps' Concerto for Oboe and Orchestra.
Well, Ruth Gipps is an interesting character and British, and so I think born in like maybe 1904 or something like that, early on. I don't remember exactly, but died in 1999. So I mean, she lived a long life, studied with the likes of Ray Vaughan Williams and Frank Bridge. I mean, the very much part of the British classical music scene of the 20th century, of the earliest 20th century. That being said, being a female composer presented its challenges, but she overcame a lot of them. She wrote lots of everything. I mean, she wrote symphonies, she wrote concerti, she wrote a horn concerto. Her husband was a professional clarinet player. She was an incredibly talented oboist and pianist. I mean, she actually appeared as a concerto soloist on this concerto, but also like the Brahms second piano concerto. So I mean that's pretty impressive that you have such virtuosity on two different instruments. So a really interesting figure, and really whose music has come to light later on. We're now really focusing on those composers that maybe for all sorts of reasons time has left. Time has gone by, and so Ruth Gipps is absolutely one of those composers. And so I was introduced to this oboe concerto, and of course we have Andrew Parker, who's one of the great musicians of the Quad City Symphony and really one of the stars. And so I thought it'd be a great way to open the season with this little known concerto. We have a big symphony, we have a super famous overture, and then we have this little known but wonderful, expressive, and very British. I mean, it's kind of the pastoral, the kind of Ray Vaughan Williamsy kind of idea. So it fits really well with the oboe. Great lyricism and I wouldn't say it's tame, but it's very, very approachable.
Well, and I'm glad you mentioned that because I thought this is a great way to tee up the fact that we get to celebrate Andrew Parker. And for folks who may not be familiar, Andrew has a very successful teaching career,
Right.
and he's teaching at the highest levels in the state of Texas, and yet he makes time to be part of the Quad City Symphony Orchestra. And I have to say, if you ever get a chance at one of those afterglow events, to just have even the briefest conversation with Andrew Parker, you're going to find a delightful and passionate person who really is so. I mean, just the energy he brings to music and his teaching and joie de vivre, I guess is the best way I can put
Well,
it.
exactly.
Super guy.
You said it exactly right. I mean, he's a great teacher. He's a great musician. He's a world class performer. I mean, and he loves coming here. He loves coming to the Quad Cities, and like he comes from Austin, Texas, for every concert. And thank God he does, because he's the rock of the wind section, and everyone he brings it at rehearsal. He is super serious about his music making, but having fun while doing it. And I just love having him in this orchestra. And so to honor, these wonderful players that we have and the ones who can come out in front of the orchestra and solo is something that we like to do. And I know the audience loves seeing, our own coming out and standing in front of the orchestra.
Well, I know that's something that many of us are looking forward to, as we are looking forward to this celebration of Anton Bruckner. This is a very important anniversary, the 200th anniversary of
Right,
Bruckner's birth. But
right.
let's put Bruckner into context in music. How do you see Bruckner in the pantheon of the great symphonic composers?
Well, Bruckner is a spiritual man and a spiritual composer, and therefore was like such an ideal child of his time. I mean, when music, so we're talking late romantic, so the late 1800s, where Wagner was, and the kind of mysticism, and the kind of, just all of a sudden music took on a certain, just like hugely evocative and expressive, and saying those, and being able to say those things that words can't say. And so the idea of from Wagner, certainly with the opera, and the way he used the orchestra, I mean, the way he evoked things, evoked emotions, evoked memories, just with such expressive music, that was seminal to guys like Bruckner. Bruckner, however, was not Wagner at all. He wasn't an opera guy. He wasn't a man of the theater. He was a very pious Catholic church musician, and so he was writing for God. And but he also worshipped Wagner, or worshipped the music of Wagner, and its expressive potential, and the way things just kind of just keep evolving, and like things never cadence, and the suspended aspect of it, and the whole kind of breadth that Wagner represented. And so, I mean, Bruckner symphonies are big. I mean, they're long, and they're, you know, what I love about it, and every time we do Bruckner here, I counsel our audience, like, you just have to put yourself in the late 1800s, and like, it is not, we are no longer at the pace of 21st century, where everything is like super quick, and where it's things unfold differently. And if you allow yourself to be caught up in the story that Bruckner tells us over 55 minutes, then it's magical, and it's transformative, and it you really don't have to. I mean, the music is so magical. I think if you just, like, don't look at your watch, and don't think about what's happening after if you really allow the music to work its magic, then Bruckner is like no one else, and it's really countercultural. It really is, to where we are as a society now, with everything quick and everything visually oriented, and 30 seconds is a long time, and it's just antithetical to that, and that's what I love about it.
Now, before we get into the actual symphony, I'm still picking on this whole Bruckner thing. I'm very grateful to you in the Quad City Symphony Orchestra for opening me up to Mahler. And for some reason, until I heard you leading our symphony in works by Mahler, I didn't really get it. You talked about the Vienna connection. If you were to draw a line from Haydn to Mozart, and maybe Brahms, because he made so much of his career in Vienna, Bruckner to Mahler, how smooth is that line, or is it really filled with a
Well,
lot of?
Bruckner and Mahler are very different. I
Yeah,
mean,
but yeah.
people put them together because they're kind of around the same time, and they create big symphonies, big long symphonies. But Bruckner is extremely different in how he expresses, how the music unfolds. I mean, Mahler is trying to create the world, is trying to, is, I mean, there's so much in a Mahler symphony, everything, the height of human ecstasy, and the lowest of lows, and I mean, Mahler is such a dramatic composer, and it's much more episodic. Bruckner is, I mean, the kind of the cliche is, I mean, he's an organist in a big cathedral, and his music is more cathedral like. I mean, just the vastness of it, and the pace of it, and the way I think you take it in. I think Mahler is, of course, one of the great musical communicators, using all of the weapons, quote unquote, of the orchestra. But Bruckner really allows music to speak for itself, in the way, almost improvisational, like like an organist improvising. Um, the way he creates space is just very, very different. And so, I mean, he's more like Schubert in that way. Schubert had, wrote in big long paragraphs, and Schubert comes right out of Beethoven. I mean, and Brahms. I mean, it's the lineage that you said. I mean, Mozart, Beethoven, Schubert, Brahms, and then Bruckner slash Mahler, but they're very different in a way.
Well, I want you to know I meant that Mahler becomes sort of the apex, right? And everyone's climbing up to that level. That's what you've done to me, you and the QCSO.
Well, and see, Mahler. I mean, Bruckner. You know, there aren't a lot of 21st century conductors who like Bruckner, to be honest. I mean, I'm an old school guy, and and I don't know if if in a past life I was an old German music, I don't know, but somehow this certainly Mahler and Bruckner, it really resonates with me, and the way the QCSO plays, I mean, they have great stylistic flexibility, but I mean, with the depth of sound and the big string section and the way we sustain, and I mean, this is a romantic orchestra. It's a super flexible orchestra. It's also a modern orchestra, but not every orchestra plays late German romantic music well. And it's something that I think our musicians take pride in doing and really enjoy doing. It is hard work. I mean, you're tired, and we rehearse twice on Friday and have the dress on Saturday, and then play on Saturday and Sunday. And so, like, you're doing an hour-long symphony like 4 times in a row, and that's just totally exhausting. But our players have the mental fortitude and certainly the skill and the will to create these magical things, and it is rare in 2024 that there's an orchestra that plays Bruckner well, I think.
Well, would you mind, before we run out of time, walking us through the Seventh Symphony and things that you would have us be especially attuned to as we hear it?
Yeah, I mean, it's the melodies that he, I mean, what he does is very, I mean, the melody repeats. The melody is, I mean, these big, long, sweeping melodies, which are chordal in tones, which have arpeggiations and things, which cover from low to high. I mean, we have a beautiful opening statement with the cellos and the horns, which go from low to high, and just kind of, it's kind of the Naturlaut. I mean, the call of nature in a way, because it's all just the harmonics opening up, and so much of his music is based on that. And so how that's manipulated, how that's built, the key centers. I mean, what's super important about Bruckner is, like the key we start in and the key we end in, and then all the kind of journey that we take in between these. So we kind of get far away from the main key. It's without being too overly technical. I mean, there's the feeling of home, there's a feeling of arrival, and there's a feeling of being away from that. And he is a great not exploiter, but he uses that device in a really effective way. Certainly, so the opening movement, big fanfare, big brass things, but big and expansive. The second movement is a heartfelt song, and this was basically a homage to Wagner. Wagner had just died, and so there are lots of Wagnerian harmonies. The music slows down to almost a standstill, but super expressive. I mean, it's about the texture of the sound and about how evocative that is. And so it's a very personal expression of Bruckner's sorrow of Wagner's death, and kind of, I think, gratitude for Wagner. Then we have a scherzo. We have this kind of, butt kicking scherzo, which he always gives us, with the kind of trumpet fanfares and things. And then last movements are kind of tricky for a lot of romantic composers, Tchaikovsky and Bruckner. I mean, they kind of, like, summing it all up is tricky to do with an hour-long symphony. And so the fourth movement of all of them kind of meanders a little bit, I gotta say. But he ends it just in a big, in a big expressive way in E major, like unapologetically, And so the wait is worth it, But again, it's, the audience just has to be patient, and they have to really let this magical music work its magic. And when you do, it's like nothing else. And I would also say, hearing it live is so different than hearing it on a CD. I mean, I myself, like, it's like I get distracted, if I'm hearing it on a CD. But if you're there live and you're breathing with your fellow audience members and you're experiencing the silences when the music goes into silence, all that magic, that's what Bruckner has that other composers don't have. And so much more than many other composers I know, I mean, it's a communal event. A Bruckner symphony is a communal event, and so you're a different person at the end of it than when you started. And that also doesn't happen often enough in our lives.
Well, we get that opportunity coming up very soon, October 5th, Saturday night, 7:30 at the Adler Theater, or on Sunday, October 6th, 2 p.m. at Centennial Hall. We're all looking forward to the first Masterworks of the 2024-2025 season. Friends, I want to thank you for joining us, but most of all, Maestro Mark Russell-Smith, thank you so much for your time. And we look forward to seeing you with the baton at the podium. Thank you.
It's going to be great. Thank you, Kai.